Hey Internet, Harris here. Since October, when the 2018 iPad Pro came out, I have been using it. I've been using it with the Apple Pencil 2nd generation and the new keyboard, and it's been awesome. It's the best iPad ever. Apple recently announced the iPad Air 10.5, and this will be the first time using a device that is quote-unquote inferior to the iPad Pro. I want to share my experience and how it might save you a few $100s, and this is presented by Picasso Lab Sleeves. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed when I got my iPad Air 10.5, this being the first 10.5-inch iPad that I've used, I actually texted my dad and I said this feels bigger than the iPad Pro. And in fact, it has a slightly smaller screen, but it just, for some reason, perhaps the squared corners versus the rounded corners, this feels like a bigger device. Dimensionally, it's almost identical to the iPad Pro. The Pro is going to be slightly thinner and it's going to look more modern and almost futuristic with its curves and edges and iPhone X style design. The iPad Air 10.5 is much more conventional in terms of an iPad, but it's still razor thin, has a laminated display, and slimmer bezels than previous iPads. But one thing that I noticed that I actually liked about this design was that the bezels give me something to hold on to when I'm reading in bed or when I'm watching videos. I do enjoy the bezels on here for holding onto. It makes it more comfortable for doing the things like I mentioned before, such as reading. Now the next thing I noticed was that, well, I stopped noticing that I was using it. Being completely truthful, when I was using this for about a week, I kind of stopped noticing that I was using a different iPad because the experience for the most part is so similar. I didn't notice any speed differences between these two devices using day-to-day situations, using the web, checking email, watching sports games. It was almost identical in terms of performance. The screen looks very good, has the same features on iOS 12 in terms of multitasking, and the only real difference was the screen refresh rate. The iPad Pro having the ProMotion really quick 120 Hz refresh rate. Shifted over to using this iPad full-time for almost a week now. I haven't really noticed a big issue. Some people will certainly disagree. I would test it out for yourself. But going back to the old display isn't bad. Going to the new iPad with its faster refresh rate is just a lot better, but this isn't a lot worse. There's kind of the semantical difference there. It's not terrible. Next would be the Lightning port. I miss being able to charge my iPad from the same cable that I was charging my Mac with, but now I use the same cable for my phone, my AirPods, and my iPad, which isn't the end of the world by any means, but it does mean that I can't charge my phone or my AirPods or my Apple Watch from the connector on my iPad like I can with the USB-C connector, which is something I really relied on often, and that's one big difference. Another difference would be the speaker situation. One speaker coming from the side. I watch a lot of Reds baseball games, and I noticed that a lot is that the audio is just coming from one side, which is significantly less immersive and quieter than the iPad Pro, which comes from both sides, and that is something that I really like and really appreciated. And there's the issue of the cameras. This doesn't have the new fancy features such as Animoji and Face ID for unlocking. It doesn't have flash on the camera, and it just doesn't have as nice of cameras as the iPad Pro does. Not the end of the world, and again, still not worth $300 difference, but it is disappointing that this has really inferior cameras to the iPad Pro, which makes it awesome for FaceTime and taking the occasional picture when my phone isn't near. But everything up until that is very similar in terms of the speed, the software, and the general performance and design. They're still very similar, and there's not a huge difference between them. A difference for me certainly does come from the Apple Pencil. The Apple Pencil 2 is so much better. You don't have to stick the pencil in the bottom of the iPad to charge it. I really hate this after using the Apple Pencil 2, and I hate having to carry this around in my bag, not having it somewhere to attach to like on the iPad Pro. That's a big difference. Now, if you're using Apple's smart keyboard cover, it actually will stick to the keyboard a little bit, so that's not the end of the world. And if you use something like this sleeve, everything fits inside and will keep it together on the go. But the Apple Pencil 1 is definitely inferior to the Apple Pencil 2, and that's a big difference, but you're paying more still for this. And if you don't take notes and you don't use an Apple Pencil, then this isn't relevant for you at all. So at the end of the day, I would not mind going back to the iPad Air 10.5 if I needed to, if I wanted to save $300+ depending on my configuration. But because I do have that luxury of being able to afford this iPad, I'm going to go with it because I like charging devices from the USB-C port. I love the audio coming from both sides, and I take a lot of notes on my iPad. But say you don't take a lot of notes, or you don't want the Apple Pencil, or say that you use headphones instead of the speakers, or say that you use a headphone jack, which the iPad Pro doesn't have, or say that you do a lot of reading and you wouldn't mind having those extra bezels, or say you're just on a budget. Those are all reasons why the iPad Air 10.5 is totally acceptable over the iPad Pro. You get to save a lot of money and still have a modern device. Let me know what you think of these two devices. Let me know in particular about the iPad Air 10.5. And if you do get it, especially with the Apple Pencil, make sure that you protect it and keep everything together with a nice sleeve from Picasso Lab. It's a very premium sleeve that comes in genuine leather. It comes in several colors and will keep the iPad protected, even with the keyboard case, whether you have the iPad Air 10.5, the iPad Pro 11 or 12.9 inch, or a Mac, it'll work for you. You can get 10% off your order with my code, and I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you for watching, and check out Picasso Lab linked down below.